The Grand Meridian Hotel sat on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street like a crown jewel pressed into the chest of Manhattan. Its revolving glass doors caught the late October sun and scattered it in ribbons across the marble lobby floor. Doormen in pressed gold-trimmed uniforms moved with choreographed precision. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. Everything about the place said money, and Marcus Hale felt right at home. He walked in like he owned it, which in a sense he nearly did. He had submitted an acquisition offer on the property 3 months ago. Real estate was his language and he spoke it fluently. At 52, Marcus had built Hale Properties Group from a single foreclosed duplex in Newark, New Jersey, into a $400 million portfolio stretching across 14 states. He had been profiled in Forbes twice. He owned homes in Manhattan, Miami, and Scottsdale. He had a corner office on the 38th floor of a Midtown building with his last name on the front door. He did not, however, have time for small talk. Mr. Hale. His assistant, Trevor, jogged lightly to keep pace. The Vantage Capital team is already upstairs. Conference room 12B. Mr. Price is already in position. Good. Marcus didn't slow down. What time is Chin flying in? His team landed at JFK 40 minutes ago. He should be here by 2. And the documents? Gerald had everything couriered this morning. It's all there. Marcus nodded and slid his phone from his jacket pocket. 3 missed calls from his lawyer. He'd deal with that later. Today was about one thing: closing the Riverside Commons deal. 47 acres of prime development land in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a projected return of $80 million over 5 years. All it needed was the signature of Raymond Chin, the primary investor, and the financial backing of Vantage Capital. Both were in this building. Today was the day. He moved through the lobby with the ease of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. That was when he almost walked directly into her. She stepped back just in time, pressing herself against a pillar near the corridor that branched off toward the event suites. She was young, 19 maybe 20, in a white hotel staff blouse, dark slacks and sensible flats. Her hair was natural, pulled back neatly. She wore a small trainee badge on her left breast pocket that read Zara, intern, guest services. She had a stack of linen napkins folded over her forearm and a look on her face that Marcus couldn't quite read. He almost kept walking. But she spoke. "Excuse me." Her voice was quiet but not timid. Southern, slightly, the kind of accent that had been softened but not erased. "Are you Mr. Hale? Marcus Hale?" He slowed, glancing at her over the top of his phone screen. "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you." She shifted the napkins on her arm. "I just thought you should know something." Trevor glanced at his watch. Marcus gave the girl half his attention at best, the other half still scrolling. "Make it quick. About 20 minutes ago, I was restocking the supply room near the east corridor. The door was cracked." She paused, and something careful moved behind her eyes, like she was choosing each word deliberately. "I overheard someone on the phone. A man in a dark gray suit, maybe 50. Salt and pepper hair. He said," she lowered her voice slightly, "he said, everything is in place. We pull the trigger tonight. By the time Hale knows what happened, it'll be too late to stop it." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like a dismissal wearing a smile's shape. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because your name was mentioned. Specifically. And it didn't sound like something good." He studied her, the earnestness in her posture, the steadiness in her gaze, the way she wasn't performing distress or angling for anything. He might have taken her seriously in another version of himself. But Marcus Hale had been in this business long enough to recognize a lobby. People approached him all the time. Assistants of rivals trying to rattle him. PR stunts. Ambitious young people looking for an introduction. He had seen every angle. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zara." "Zara Coleman." "Well, Zara Coleman." He tucked his phone into his pocket and straightened his tie. "I appreciate the concern. But I've been doing this for 30 years. I know every play in the book and I've got the best team in New York in that room upstairs." His voice wasn't cruel, it was simply sealed. Final. "I don't take advice from hotel staff, sweetheart. But thank you." He walked away. Trevor fell into step beside him and neither of them looked back. Zara stood at the pillar for a moment, watching the elevator doors close around Marcus Hale. She exhaled slowly through her nose, shifted the napkins back to both arms, and turned down the corridor toward the banquet prep room. She had done what Mama Rose had always told her to do. If you see something wrong, say something. Whether people listen was their own business. She had tried. At the elevator bank, the numbers climbed. Marcus checked his watch. 1:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, Raymond Chen would walk through those front doors. In 30, the deal would be signed. By evening, he'd be celebrating at his favorite steakhouse on 54th Street. He allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. Everything was in place. Conference room 12B on the 9th floor of the Grand Meridian had been set up with the kind of precision that cost money. A long mahogany table ran the length of the room, flanked by leather chairs. Water glasses sparkled. Presentation folders, embossed with the Hale Properties Group logo, sat at every seat. The view beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows was pure Manhattan, gray and glittering under the October sky. Gerald Price was already seated at the far end of the table when Marcus walked in, laptop open, papers organized, reading glasses resting on the end of his nose. Gerald had been Marcus's CFO for 11 years. He was precise, unflappable, and deeply familiar with every financial nerve of Hale Properties Group. Marcus trusted him the way a man trusts the floor beneath his feet, without thinking about it at all. "Raymond Zedia?" Marcus asked, setting his briefcase on the table. 5 minutes out, Gerald said without looking up. "Vantage team is already here, 3 of them including their lead counsel." Marcus scanned the room, shook hands with the Vantage reps, and took his seat at the head of the table. The energy in the room was good. Controlled. Professional. This was where Marcus was most alive. Not in boardrooms full of shouting, but in these precise, high-value moments just before something significant changed hands. Raymond Chen arrived at 2:03 p.m., a trim man in his late 60s with a firm handshake and careful eyes. They exchanged pleasantries. Folders were opened. Marcus began his presentation. The land valuation, the projected development timeline, the return model. He was 6 slides in when Raymond Chen's assistant leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Raymond's expression didn't change dramatically. It shifted, the way ice shifts just before it cracks. He raised a hand, interrupting Marcus mid-sentence. "I need a moment," Raymond said quietly. Marcus stopped. "Of course." Raymond turned to his assistant, who slid a tablet across the table. Raymond studied it. The two of them exchanged murmured words Marcus couldn't hear. The Vantage Capital lead counsel, a thin woman named Patricia Osei, also received a message on her phone. She read it and went very still. The silence in the room changed texture. "Marcus." Raymond Chen looked up. His voice was measured, but there was something behind it, disappointment or perhaps the careful removal of trust. "I'm going to need to pause this process." "Pause it." Marcus repeated the words carefully, the way a surgeon examines something unexpected in an incision. "We received documentation this morning, financial projections for Riverside Commons that are materially different from what you've presented here today." Raymond folded his hands on the table. "Specifically, internal documents indicating significant cost overruns in your current Atlanta development that would jeopardize your capacity to finance this deal." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop. "I don't know what documents you received, but they came from inside your organization, Marcus." The room went quiet enough to hear the ventilation system hum. Marcus turned to Gerald. Gerald was looking at his laptop screen. "Gerald." Marcus's voice was low and flat. Gerald slowly closed the laptop. He removed his reading glasses and folded them with a care that struck Marcus, in that surreal moment, as obscene. Then Gerald stood up. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he said, and he almost sounded it. "I genuinely am." He walked out of the conference room. Nobody stopped him. Marcus was too stunned to speak for the 3 seconds it took for the door to click shut, and by then his instincts kicked in. He grabbed his phone and called Gerald. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called his office. "Mr. Hale," his office manager said, her voice unsteady. "Mr. Price, he had security help him move some boxes out about an hour ago. He said it was archive material. And his computer access has been deactivated. Our IT team is saying someone initiated the deactivation remotely, before they left the building." Raymond Chen was already gathering his documents. The Vantage team followed suit, quietly, professionally, like people leaving a funeral. Patricia Osei paused at the door. "Our legal team will be in touch," she said. And then they were gone. Marcus stood at the head of the table, alone. The Riverside Commons deal was dead. $34 million in pending transactions, payments to contractors, bridge financing, pre-construction deposits, had been frozen the moment Vantage pulled out. His Atlanta development projections, whatever Gerald had leaked, would now be in the hands of every investor contact Raymond Chen had. The damage would spread before Marcus could contain it. 11 years. He had given Gerald Price 11 years. He walked out of the conference room slowly, like a man navigating a room where the floor might give way. He took the elevator down to the lobby. He didn't know exactly where he was going, outside maybe? He needed air and a moment to think and a lawyer on the phone. He stepped out of the elevator. And there she was. Zara Coleman was near the concierge desk, straightening a floral arrangement that had been disturbed by the afternoon foot traffic. She was humming something faintly under her breath, focused on the flowers, and she didn't see him at first. When she looked up and found Marcus Hale standing 10 feet away staring at her, she went still. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't smirk or cross her arms. She just looked at him, quietly, openly, with an expression that held no victory at all. Only a kind of sorrow. The sorrow of someone who had hoped to be wrong. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, like a man who did not know what to do next. If this story has you gripped, you're in the right place. Nikolai Stories is where every story hits different. Like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that moves you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lobby moved around them, bellhops with luggage carts, a couple checking in at the front desk, the soft piano music that looped through the hotel's sound system. Life continuing, indifferent to the wreckage of Marcus Hale's afternoon. He crossed the lobby and stopped a few feet from her. "How did you know?" His voice was stripped of its boardroom authority. What was left sounded almost human. Zara set down the stem she was holding and turned to face him fully. She considered him, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to trust too quickly, and also not to be unkind without reason. "The man on the phone," she said. "I'd seen him before." Marcus waited. "About 3 weeks ago I was working a private event here. Corporate charity gala, 8th floor. My job was coat check, but they were short-staffed on the catering side, so I was running drinks for part of the night." She spoke plainly without drama. "There was a group of men near the window, 3 of them. I was refilling their glasses and people don't really notice staff. They never do." She said it without bitterness, just as fact. "One of them, the one I heard today on the phone, was talking about a business deal. He used your name." He said, "Marcus still thinks I'm on his side. By the time he figures it out, I'll have bled the operation dry and jumped ship. The man trusts everyone who flatters him and nobody who challenges him." Marcus was very still. "I didn't know who you were then," Zara continued. "I didn't know what deal or what company. I just remembered his face and his voice because—" She paused as if deciding something, "because what he said was cruel. And I've seen enough cruelty to remember the face it comes from." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the lobby armchairs. He pressed his fingers to his temples. The gesture made him look older than he had 2 hours ago, less like a man in command and more like someone's tired father. 11 years, he said mostly to himself. "He was with me for 11 years. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair across from him, carefully, like she wasn't sure she had permission, but had decided to take it anyway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He glanced at her. "Sure. Did anyone else ever warn you about him?" "Not today, before today." "Did anyone ever say something felt off?" The question landed somewhere uncomfortable. Marcus looked at the floor. His executive assistant Linda had mentioned once, about 2 years ago, that Gerald seemed to be running parallel conversations with vendors, keeping Marcus out of loops he should have been in. Marcus had told her she was misreading the situation. His attorney, David Park, had flagged some irregular payment routing 6 months back. Marcus had told him Gerald was restructuring for tax efficiency. His own daughter, Donna, estranged now for reasons that lived in a complicated place in his chest, had told him years ago before everything fell apart between them, "Dad, you only listen to people who already agree with you." He had told her she was being dramatic. "Yeah," he said quietly. "People tried to tell me." Zara nodded like she had already known the answer. "Where I come from, Clover, Georgia, population about 2,000, you learn real early that the loudest voices in the room aren't always the most honest ones. My grandmother, Mama Rose, used to say, 'Baby, a fool and his money are easy to find. It's his attention that's hard to steal.'" Despite everything, something moved across Marcus's face, not quite a smile but a softening. "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman. Smartest person I've ever met. And she never went past 8th grade. Zara folded her hands in her lap. "I grew up with nothing. I mean that literally, some winters nothing. Mama Rose worked 2 jobs. I wore my cousin's hand-me-down shoes to school until I was 16. I got here, New York, this internship, because of a Rotary scholarship and because I worked for it every single day. And one thing that poverty teaches you, if you let it, is how to read people. When you can't afford to be wrong about who to trust, you get good at noticing. Marcus was watching her now. Not with the half attention of 2 hours ago. Fully. I noticed you the moment you walked into this lobby, she said. Not because you were rich, there's rich people here every day, but because of how you walked. Like you'd already decided everyone in the room was less important than wherever you were going. She met his eyes steadily. People who walk like that, they're usually surrounded by yes men. Because the no men gave up trying. The honesty of it should have stung. It did sting a little. But Marcus Hale, sitting in the lobby of the Grand Meridian at 3:15 in the afternoon with his career on fire, found that the sting felt more like antiseptic than insult. I almost didn't say anything to you, Zara admitted. I talked myself out of it twice. Told myself it wasn't my business. That you wouldn't listen anyway. She looked at her hands. But then I thought about Mama Rose. And I thought, what would I want someone to do if it were her? She shrugged. So I tried. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city moved in its relentless rhythm. Taxis and pedestrians and the low constant roar of a place that never stopped. Marcus had loved this city once. Loved its hunger, its indifference, its way of rewarding anyone with enough nerve. He had mistaken that hunger for wisdom. He had confused confidence with clarity. I owe you an apology, he said at last. Zara looked at him. What I said to you earlier, the way I dismissed you. He held her gaze. That was wrong. And I'm sorry. She studied him for a moment, measuring the sincerity of it. Then she gave a single nod. Not a forgiveness performance. Just acknowledgement. A door opening. What are you going to do now? She asked. Marcus straightened slightly. The stunned look had not fully left his face, but something else was beginning to move underneath it. The machinery of a man who had built something from nothing and knew, however painful, how to begin again. First, he said, I'm going to call my attorney. Then I'm going to find out exactly what Gerald took and where it went. He paused. And then I'm going to figure out how a 19-year-old hotel intern saw something 11 years of proximity couldn't. Zara almost smiled. I'm not sure that's the right lesson. What's the right lesson? She looked at him with those steady, clear eyes. That you should have been paying the kind of attention to everyone around you that you paid to the people you thought mattered. Marcus Hale, for the second time that afternoon, had nothing to say. 3 days passed before Marcus called her. She almost didn't pick up. An unknown number with a Manhattan area code could have been anyone. But something made her answer, and his voice came through the line careful and deliberate, nothing like the polished efficiency she'd heard in the lobby. Zara. It's Marcus Hale. I got your number from hotel management. I hope that's okay. She was in her apartment in the Bronx, a studio she shared with a roommate from her scholarship program. It was small and warm and smelled like the candles her roommate burned. It's okay, she said. I'd like to buy you coffee. Or lunch, whatever you prefer. I want to talk. Pause. And I promise I'll actually listen this time. They met the next morning at a small cafe on Lexington Avenue that Marcus had chosen specifically because it was not the kind of place anyone would recognize him. A corner table, strong coffee, plain menus. Zara arrived 2 minutes early in a neat sweater and jeans, a small notebook tucked under her arm out of habit. Marcus was already there, and he stood when she walked in, a gesture she noted without comment. They talked for nearly 3 hours. Marcus walked her through what his legal team had uncovered in the 72 hours since the collapse. Gerald had been running a shadow negotiation with a competing development group called Meridian Axis for the better part of 8 months. He had systematically funneled proprietary project data, cost structures, investor contact lists, land acquisition targets, to Meridian Axis in exchange for a senior executive position and an undisclosed equity stake. The leaked financial documents shown to Raymond Chen had been selectively manipulated. Real numbers from Marcus's Atlanta project, stripped of context and repackaged to look catastrophic. My attorney says it's a clear case of corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty, Marcus said. Gerald is looking at serious federal exposure. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. Zara waited. I had every advantage. Every resource. Background checks, legal agreements, NDAs. And a 19-year-old intern with a tray of napkins saw it coming before I did. He said it without self-pity, more like a man cataloging a wound to understand it. Why? Zara turned her coffee cup slowly on the saucer. Because you were looking at Gerald through the lens of what he'd already proven to you. 11 years of trust. You weren't seeing him anymore, You were seeing your own history with him. And you had no history with him. None. I just saw a man in an empty corridor saying something that felt wrong. That's all. She looked up. But you know what the real problem is? It's not that you trusted Gerald. Trust isn't the problem. The problem is you built a whole world where only certain kinds of people got the benefit of your attention. And people like me, hotel staff, the young, the black, the broke, we were furniture. Useful maybe. But not worth listening to. The directness of it sat in the air between them. You're right, Marcus said. I know. Not arrogant, just honest. Does it make you angry? He asked. Moving through the world like that? Being invisible to people like me? Zara considered the question seriously. It used to. When I was younger and I didn't understand it, it felt personal. Like something was wrong with me. She shook her head. Now I understand it's a poverty of imagination. People who've only ever been around one kind of person, one tax bracket, one background, one experience, they literally can't see beyond it. It's not malice. It's just a very expensive blindness. Marcus was quiet for a moment. A very expensive blindness. He repeated it slowly. You should write, you know that? I'm studying communications at CUNY, she said. On a scholarship. Night classes. And the internship is days. Monday through Friday, 6 to 2. She smiled briefly. It's a full life. It is. He said it with genuine respect. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no pressure either way. He set down his cup. My attorney's team is building the case against Gerald. One of the strongest things we have is testimony about what was said, specifically that language about bleeding Marcus dry. You heard it directly. Firsthand. Would you be willing to speak to my legal team? Zara looked at him steadily. If I do this, I want it handled properly. I'm not signing anything I haven't read. I want to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to. Absolutely. You'll have time to review everything. And I want it on record. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Not for money. Not for a favor. She held his gaze. I'm not for sale and I'm not looking for a patron. Something moved across Marcus's face. Admiration, clean and uncomplicated. I understand completely, he said. 2 days later, Zara sat in the offices of Park & Associates on the 22nd floor of a building on Madison Avenue, across from Marcus's attorney David Park and 2 members of his litigation team. She recounted, with precise and unembellished clarity, every word she had heard Gerald Price speak at that charity gala 3 weeks prior. Her memory was exceptional. Dates, phrases, the layout of the room, the position of the men, the glass she had been carrying. The litigation team exchanged glances as she spoke. Afterward, David Park shook her hand and said quietly, "That was remarkable testimony." Zara thanked him and reached for her jacket. In the hallway, Marcus caught up with her. "Thank you," he said. "I mean it." She looked at him, and for a moment something shifted between them. Not romance. Not transaction. Something rarer and more durable. The tentative, genuine beginning of mutual respect between 2 people who had no obvious reason to understand each other and were choosing to try anyway. "Don't waste it," she said. "Whatever comes out the other side of this, don't go back to being the man who walked into that hotel lobby." Marcus nodded slowly. "I don't think I can. I'm not sure he'd survive another Gerald Price." Zara smiled, the full version this time, the one she hadn't given him before. "You're still here, and so is Nikolai's stories. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to watch it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Nikolai's stories so the next story finds you first." 3 months is both a long time and nothing at all. In 3 months, Gerald Price was formally charged with corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty by the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. His agreement with Meridian Axis, which his own attorney eventually handed over in a plea negotiation, detailed 8 months of deliberate data theft, totaling an estimated $6.2 million in stolen proprietary material. He was facing up to 20 years in federal prison. His attorney was calling it a tragic lapse in judgment. Marcus's attorney was calling it something less charitable. In 3 months, Marcus recovered $28 million of the $34 million in frozen transactions as his legal team systematically dismantled Gerald's network of redirected payments. The remaining $6 million was tied up in ongoing litigation, but David Park believed they'd recover most of it. In 3 months, the Riverside Commons deal, while dead in its original form, had been restructured. Raymond Chin, upon learning the full scope of what had been done to Marcus, had reached out personally. The terms were different now, more cautious, with additional oversight. But the land was still there and the vision was still sound. And in 3 months, Marcus Hale had done something he had never done in 30 years of business. He had changed. Not the grand, theatrical transformation of a man who'd had a revelation and purchased his salvation. Something quieter and more real, the slow daily work of a man learning to see differently. He'd had 3 conversations with his daughter Donna, each one awkward and bruised but real. He'd restructured his senior team with a deliberate eye toward people who would push back. He'd called Linda, his executive assistant, into his office and apologized, specifically looking at her, saying her name, for every time he had dismissed her instincts. She had started crying, which had embarrassed them both and made it exactly right. And he'd kept thinking about Zara. Not in a way he couldn't explain, in a way he absolutely could. She had shown him something about the cost of his blindness that no board meeting, no financial loss, no professional humiliation had ever managed to show him. She had done it without agenda, without performance, without anything to gain. That kind of honesty was rarer than $34 million, and Marcus had been in business long enough to know how to value rare things. He'd called her 4 weeks after their meeting at Park & Associates. "I want to do something," he'd said. "I'd like your input on it, if you're willing." "Depends what it is," she'd said. Which was exactly the right answer. What it was this, a scholarship fund. The Coleman Foundation, named for Zara, though she had argued against it, seeded with $1 million from Marcus's personal holdings. Its purpose: full scholarships for first-generation low-income students pursuing degrees in business, real estate, communications, and STEM at accredited universities across the United States. The inaugural class would be 5 students. Within 5 years, Marcus intended to fund 50 per year. Zara had been silent for a long moment when he proposed it. "You're not doing this to make yourself feel better?" she'd said. It wasn't a question, it was a condition. "No," he'd said. "I'm doing it because it's right. And because your grandmother's shoes were hand-me-downs until you were 16, and there are 1,000 kids out there right now in the same pair of shoes, and that is a waste I have the specific ability to help fix." Another silence. "Okay," she'd said. "But I want to be involved in the selection process. And I want the criteria to include character, not just grades." Done. The press announcement was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Marcus had insisted on it, with a particular kind of poetry in the choice of venue. A small but carefully assembled gathering, journalists, community advocates, representatives from 3 universities who had partnered with the foundation, and a handful of the first applicants who had already been notified they'd been selected. Zara sat in the front row. She was wearing a deep blue dress she'd bought with her first paycheck that felt like something other than a work uniform. Her hair was out, full and natural around her face. She had called Mama Rose that morning from the Bronx, and Mama Rose had said, "Baby, you go in there and you sit up straight and you remember who you are." She was sitting up straight. Marcus stood at the podium. The room was quiet, polite, attentive. He moved through the remarks his communications team had prepared: the foundation's mission, the funding structure, the partnership universities. He was good at this part. 30 years of presentations had given him an easy command of a room. And then a journalist near the back raised her hand. "Mr. Hale, you've described this as a personal transformation as much as a philanthropic initiative. Can you tell us what actually changed for you? What was the moment?" Marcus looked up from his notes. He looked at Zara. She met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod, not permission exactly. Just presence. "I'm here. Say the true thing." He set down his notes. 3 months ago," he said, "I walked into this hotel lobby convinced I was the most prepared man in the building." His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not, something that the room could feel, leaning forward slightly. "I was about to close a deal I'd worked toward for 2 years. I had every advantage money and experience could buy." He paused. "And a 19-year-old intern tried to warn me that something was wrong. She approached me with nothing to gain and everything to risk, her job, her dignity, and she told me exactly what she'd heard." He stopped. "I dismissed her." The words fell flat and honest into the room. "I told her I didn't take advice from hotel staff." He let that sit. 2 hours later, my CFO walked out of a boardroom having systematically dismantled 11 years of work. And that young woman was still in this lobby, still on her shift, watching me fall apart with more grace than I deserved. He looked at Zara again. And here is where Marcus Hale, a man who had spoken in boardrooms and ballrooms and conference halls for 3 decades, a man who had negotiated in the language of millions without flinching, a man who prided himself on never losing the thread, found that the words were simply gone. Not because he had forgotten what he wanted to say. Because what he felt in that moment was too large and too honest for the prepared remarks on the podium, and too important to reduce to something that fit neatly in a press quote. He stood there, in front of the journalists and the advocates and the scholarship students who were watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. He looked at Zara Coleman, 19 years old, from Clover, Georgia, daughter of Mama Rose, night student at CUNY, the girl with the napkins and the quiet voice and the eyes that saw clearly through the noise, and he could not speak. The room waited. Zara looked back at him. And then, slowly, she stood up. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply rose to her feet in the front row of the Grand Meridian Hotel, where 3 months ago she had been invisible, and she stood in her blue dress with her shoulders back and her head level, and the room, which had been watching Marcus, turned to look at her. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the room and spread, and Marcus Hale stood at the podium and pressed his lips together and shook his head slowly, the way a man does when he is trying very hard to hold something together. He was left completely speechless. Outside, an hour later, when the photographers had packed up and the journalists had filed their stories and the scholarship students had taken their photos and hugged each other in the lobby, Zara stepped through the revolving glass doors of the Grand Meridian and stood on Fifth Avenue in the October air. She pulled out her phone. It rang twice. "Baby?" Mama Rose's voice came through like a warm room. "How'd it go?" Zara looked out at the city, the taxis and the pigeons and the people moving fast in every direction, all of them carrying their whole lives with them like everyone always does. "Good, Grandma," she said. "Real good." She smiled to herself. "I think I just changed somebody's life." Mama Rose was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "No, baby. You reminded him he had one. Thank you for watching this story from beginning to end. That means everything. Nicoai Stories exist to bring you narratives that move you, challenge you, and remind you what really matters. If this one landed, share it, save it, and come back for the next one. Subscribe to Nicoai Stories. Your next favorite story is already waiting.